Hi, welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry, and my next project that I'm going to be doing a tutorial on requires that we use bias binding. So I thought before I do that tutorial, it would be good if I show you how to make bias binding. It's not a hard process to do, so we're going to do that today. Let's take a look at how that works. So I'm needing this bias binding for the next tutorial, like I was telling you. So to start off with, this is a ½ yard of fabric. It's easier to start with a ½ yard. So it was folded, ½ yard of fabric. I pressed it really nice. And then you just open it up and you want to cut your selvage off each end. Now, our first thing that we need to do is we need to find our corner and cut that off. And we'll just set it aside when we do, in case we need a small piece later. It depends. I think a ½ yard gets you somewhere between 160 to 180 inches, I think it is. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's about what it is. And I'm going to be needing about 90 to 100 for my next project. So that's what we're going to do. So if you're right-handed, we're going to start by taking a triangle off this side. If you're left-handed, you're going to be starting on this side. So just know that whichever way you need to cut, you can do this. Since I'm right-handed, I'm going to need to start over in this corner. If you have a triangle that is 45 degrees, and you got to be careful with triangles because yes, there's many versions of triangles, but some are 60 degrees, some are 45, some are other, and so you could place a 45-degree angle in this corner, or triangle in this corner, and make your cut. I did not have one right handy that is 45 degree, so I'm going to show you how you would do it. So you would take your ruler and you're going to find your 45-degree mark. And then you're going to line that up with the edge of your fabric, right on the 45-degree line. And then you'll slide it down until you have the 45-degree line right on the edge of your fabric, and you'll want to be right at the point at the end of your ruler. Now if you're on the other side, if you're on the left hand side, you'll do the same thing. Let me see. I just had this a minute ago. Okay, so if you're on the other side, it's the same thing on the left-hand side. Let me move this over a little bit. So I just line my 45-degree up, and you just slide your ruler until the corner of your fabric is right on the tip of that 45 degrees, and that you have your 45-degree line matched up with your edge of your fabric. And then you would make your cut. Another way to do that, because some people find it difficult to use their lines on their ruler, or you may have a straight ruler, excuse me, that doesn't have the 45 degree. So if that's the case, you can take a piece of paper and you can make a square. And once you make your square, you just fold your square in half so it makes your triangle. And then you would just place your square, your triangle that you've now made, down in the corner. Match it up with each edge of your fabric so it lines up. And you have the corner of your triangle right down in the corner. And then you would make your mark, just tracing the edge of that paper. And I'm using the Frixion pen that erases with heat. But you could use chalk, or you could use a air removing pen, or you could use a water soluble pen. Whatever your preference is, whatever you have on hand. Okay, so I've made my line, so I know where I need to cut. If you're left-handed, you'll do the right side. If you're right-handed, you're going to do the left side. So I'm just going to line up my ruler with the mark that I made. And then I'll make my cut. Just want to make sure that you have your ruler nice and straight on that line. And go ahead and make your cut. And I'm just going to set this aside because if you needed extra, you could get a strip out of this to add on. So from here, now bias binding varies in size of what you're going to need to cut. Sometimes people need 2 inches, sometimes 2 1/4. I need 2 1/2. So that's what I'm going to be cutting today, is 2 1/2. And there is thinner bias binding as well for different projects. But what I need today is 2 1/2 inches for my project that I'm going to be teaching a tutorial on. Excuse me. So I'm just going to check my ruler, 1 2 1/2 inches, and you're going to line up your line on that edge where we cut. And you'll make your cut. I'm needing a new blade. I definitely need to change out my blade. I've been doing a lot of cutting lately, so I need to change out my blade after this project. So I've moved that to the side. You could just keep cutting if you can see your cut line, but where I'm using white fabric, I would have a hard time seeing my cut, so I'm just going to slip that to the side. And I'm going to line up my ruler again. So I'm at my 2 1/2. And you just want to double check, because whenever you move the top of your ruler, the bottom of your ruler moves. So once you have that set up, just hold on to the bottom of your ruler real tight, and then you can adjust the top, and then always double check that it didn't shift on you. And I'm on the 3 1/2 inch mark. So see, it's good that I double checked. They say that you should always measure twice and cut once. That way you don't end up with the wrong size. And my ruler just slipped on me. So if you do have a problem with your ruler slipping, which this ruler doesn't have the nice, I have a non-slip thing under here, but I haven't put my little tabs under there. You can put a little weight at the end, just a little hand weight at the end of your ruler to hold your ruler in place. And it really helps when you're making a long cut. Okay, so I have my next piece. Whenever your ruler, especially since this is only single thickness, whenever your rotary cutter isn't cutting nice so that it separates easily, you're due for a new rotary blade to be put in. So you'll keep lining up, but you're going to reach a point where your ruler doesn't go all the way down. You're going to be off just a little bit down here. So I'll show you how we're going to do that. I'm going to slide my ruler down. Since I start cutting down here, I'm going to slide my ruler down so I can start my cut at the edge. I'm going to put my little weight on there to hold that in place for me. And I'm going to cut, but I'm going to hold my rotary blade in place. And I'm going to slide my ruler down, making sure that I'm on my line on both ends. You don't want to move your rotary cutter, just your ruler. And then I'll set my weight back down to hold that in place while I'm cutting, and then I'll continue my cut to the end. And we're going to keep doing that all the way across our fabric. Now I'm sure that some cut faster than I do, but I'm always one that I want to double and triple check my things because I hate to waste fabric. And I like to make sure that I have enough fabric whenever I'm doing a project. Okay, so we're going to make the same thing. We're missing about this much at the end of the ruler being able to be up there. So I've got it slid down. So we'll start our cut down here. And I'm going to hold my rotary cutter in place. And I'm going to slide my ruler up. While I'm holding this in place, I'm going to double check to make sure that my ruler stayed right on the line for my 2.5 inches, and then I'll continue to cut. You don't want to pick your rotary cutter up and move it because you could end up not right where you had ended cutting, and it can kind of make a jag in your cut. You don't want that. So I'm just going to keep moving these aside and going along and measuring and cutting. And I'll get to a point back down this way where my ruler will meet up both ends again. And just remember, when you slide your ruler up, you want to check both ends to make sure that you're right on the edge of your fabric. And I like using that little weight because it keeps my ruler right in place at the end. So as I'm moving up, I don't have my ruler shift on me. So you just keep measuring and cutting, going across your fabric. I don't have a problem once I get halfway through with my ruler slipping. It's only when I'm way down this end that I sometimes have a problem with it slipping on me. I had some little no-slip tabs underneath, but they were getting a little bit old and I had a couple peel up on me, so I was going to put some new ones on and I totally forgot before I started the tutorial, but my little handy weight will help me out. We're almost done. Okay, now I'm at the end where I can cut straight across and I don't have to shift up my ruler. Just move this over a little bit so that you can see. And I'm going to cut until I run out of my 2.5 inch cuts. Oops. And I should have put my thing up there. It didn't shift bad though, so I didn't lose my mark. And I'm right at the point where I'm at the beginning triangle So I'm just going to set that aside. I probably won't need that piece, but I'm going to keep it just in case I need it. So now we're going to line up our fabrics. All the ones that have the angles so that they're, let me shift this over again. I want to make sure you're being able to see. So I have my angle. Well, I'll just move these over so I can get this in the camera. So I have my angles up at the top that go this way, like that. And then I have my bottom angle that goes like this. And this is the way that we want our angles to go. So we'll line up all the ones that go in the proper direction. And that's most of them. But then we reach a point, and I want you to be able to see this. There will be a few pieces on each end that either the top angles won't be right. Let me shift you over just a little bit. So see how this angle's going that way? We need all of our pieces for the top angles to be going in that direction. And see, this angle is going this way instead of pointing, you know, up on this side. It's pointing up on this side. So we're going to have to fix those pieces. So I'm going to line up my pieces that are like that. And I'm just going to get them matched up on top of each other. And this one's got an awkward piece at the top. So we're going to put that on the bottom. And we're going to put these pieces on top of that one. Just so that we can make sure that when we go to change our angle that we have all of our pieces lined up nicely. And I do have one piece where my ruler slipped, so I'm going to fix that one and cut it down. Luckily, it was right at the end, and I can fix that really easy. So I have these lined up. Now, I could put them on a line and get my 45-degree angle and fix them with the ruler. So if you wanted to use your ruler to fix the 45-degree, you could line it up and get it. However, the easier way, believe it or not, is to take one of your other pieces, and I just make sure that these are directly on top of each other, all lined up perfectly, both sides, so none are stuck, stuck out from each other. They're perfectly on top of each other. And then I'm going to take a piece that has the angle the way that I need it. My cat wants to go out, but it's raining and it's nighttime and I don't want her to go outside, so she's a little mad at me. So I'm going to line this piece up so that my point is right on the very bottom of where this point came down. So it's going to go just like this, and I'm going to lay this piece on top of it, and that will show me where I need to cut. And I'm just going to move these pieces out of the way, and I'll take my ruler and I'll match it up against that. Whoop, wrong one. It's going to be up against this one. So I'm going to move this fabric so that I can reach that. because of the way that I need to cut. So I hope you're being able to see this. This is the wrong angle. So I put a piece that has the angle going in the proper direction right on top of it, which is going this way. And that's the way that I need my angle to be. And it's met right up with the edge of this and the edge of that. So I'll line my ruler up against it. So it goes right up against that piece that is correct. And then I'm going to make my cut. Now, all of those pieces have the proper angle. And I can set them over with my other pieces. Whoops. So now I can put them on top of my other pieces that all have the right cut. So those were fixed. So now I need the bottoms of these to have this angle. But they're going in the other ones, the opposing ones on this side are going in the opposite direction. So I need them to be like this, but they're like this. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to line these all up on top of each other. And I have another one of those odd pieces that doesn't even have an angle that I'm putting on the bottom of my pieces. And I'm going to line these all on top of each other. Just like that. So now I'm going to take a piece that has the angle the way that I need it, and I'm going to lay it on top of those. Now there's only 3 pieces on each side for me that didn't have the angle going at the bottom or the top the way that I needed it. So it's not hard to lay them on top of each other. You could fix them individually if that's easier for you. But for me, it's just as easy to line them all on top of each other and cut them all at one time. So now I'm just going to set this here. And I can see where that piece is, so I'm going to line my ruler right up against that piece. And I'll cut. And I end up with my extra pieces. So I do end up with a little bit of extra. I have 2 extra triangles in these little pieces that I cut off. And there is a way to do these so that they're all, so that you can do bias binding so that it's all in one cut. But it's a little more difficult to do that until you get used to the method of it. So I wanted to show you today the easiest method that I know how to do bias binding. We're going to take this over to the machine and I'm going to show you how we put these together. It's pretty similar to how you would put strips together for your regular binding. So let's go ahead over to the sewing machine and we'll take a look at how these go together. So in order to sew these together, we're going to do it very similar to how you would put together binding your regular binding when you're cutting with the fabric strips. The only difference is we're going to put these together so one is angled this way and one is angled up this way. And you want to make sure that your raw edges meet up to each other on each piece. And we have, now this is this is solid fabric, so I'm not worried about which is right side and wrong side. But if you have printed fabric, you're going to want to pay attention that you have right side to right side. And what we're looking for, now if I wanted to get a perfect 1/4 of an inch seam, you want to have 1/4 of an inch dog ears. That will be these little extra pieces right here that are going to be stuck out. But what we're paying attention to is not whether or not we have a perfect 1/4 of an inch seam. And I got to make sure that these are lined up to each other on the raw edges. What we're paying attention to is we want to sew right from this little corner here down to this intersecting corner right here. That's where we're sewing from. So if you laid these together with your raw edges meeting up and you have larger dog ears, you're going to end up with a larger seam. And you can trim that down to a 1/4 of an inch with a ruler afterward. If that happens, that's fine. But what we're paying attention to is that we sew from this corner right here to this corner right here. And I put this on top of cardboard because I needed white for bias binding. So I decided to teach with that since that's what I'm going to need in my next tutorial. It just makes it easier for me to do the tutorials with what I have in need coming up. So I know it's a little bit harder to see, so I put it on top of cardboard so that you would be able to see a lot better. And so once again, trying to keep my fingers out of the way, we're wanting to sew from this little corner here up to that little corner there. Now, I know that when you're first doing this, and even if you're practiced at doing it, a lot of times it's hard to get a straight line going from this corner to that corner. Now, I can do it pretty well when I'm doing my other binding most of the time. Once in a while, I get a little off. But most of the time, I can get a pretty straight line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to make sure that my ruler is lined up with that little corner there and the little corner up here. And once that I can see that my ruler is lined up, I'm just going to take my Frixion pen and I'll draw my sewing line. So that way I can make sure that I have these lined up. Now if you want, it can be handy to put a little pin in here so that when you get it over to your machine, you know that your raw edges are lined up to each other. Okay? So let's go ahead and sew that. And I'm just using my regular foot on my sewing machine, nothing fancy, because I'm just following the line that I drew. I'm going to turn my machine down a little bit because I can be Speedy Gonzales with my foot on the pedal. And I'm going to use 2.0 stitches. And I'm just going to line up my line with that red mark in the center of my foot so it will be lined up with my needle. And with my needle down, I can see that it's lined up. And I'm going to go ahead and sew across that line. And I can go ahead and take my pin out. Now when I measure my seam on that, it's about 3/8. And I can go ahead and trim that afterward with a ruler. Just put a ruler up to the line that you sewed, leaving 1/4 of an inch on the other side, and you can trim that to a perfect 1/4 of an inch if you want. The most important thing that we're looking for is to make sure that we went from this corner right here to this right here. And then we will cut those dog ears off so it's nice and flush on this side and on this side, because we aren't going to need those in our way. Now when we open this up, our pieces are perfectly matched. And I just open up my seam and I finger press my seam open. And you can cut your dog ears after you do this so that you can see that it's flush, because I still, even though I cut my dog ears ahead of time, when I went and folded it, I've still got a little piece right there. So if I would have done my dog ears after, this would have been perfectly straight. So it's really probably better to do your dog ears after. But see, I have a perfect straight piece from side to side with my join at the top and the bottom both. And you'll continue to do that through all your bias binding. And when you're all done attaching your pieces to each other, you'll have one super long piece of bias binding, somewhere between 160 to 180 inches, I believe. You'll just do like you do with your regular binding, and you fold it in half and press it. And then your bias binding is all ready to go. Just make sure, what I do is I make some ahead of time. Quite often, if I'm going to be doing mixed up pieces and blocks and whatnot using my scraps, I like to keep some black and some white already pre-made most of the time. I just didn't have any white on hand, so I figured, well, you know, since I need to do a tutorial anyways on bias binding, I might as well just do my white. And you can take this afterward, after you've pressed it, you can roll it around a ruler so that it's on top of each other, you know. Just keep rolling it around the ruler. Just make sure that as you're doing that, and then you can just slide it off your ruler and you'll have a nice roll of bias binding that you can set aside. I have a drawer, my accent coming out there, that I keep this in. I have several different ones that I have extra left over, or I've pre-made it because I use it often. And so I just keep it in a little, one of those like plastic shoe boxes, and I have some little cabinets that have drawers in them. And so I keep it in there. When you're rolling it up, just don't stretch. You don't want to pull this and stretch it. This is a little stretchier when it's on the bias, so you don't want to pull it and stretch it and get your binding all stretched out, and it will mess with your fabric. And you want it to stay in a nice form. So just don't overstretch it when you're rolling it around on a ruler, or however you're going to make it ahead of time and set it aside. Just be careful of not stretching it out, because this is stretchier. So I hope that this tutorial has helped you. I hope that now you won't feel like you can't make bias binding. It's really a very easy process. Later on, we'll take a look at how to do the single cut bias binding, so it's all in one piece. But I find that for beginning, when you've never made bias binding before, this is a lot easier to do. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. This has been from Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry. I hope that you'll take a moment, like the video if it has been helpful for you, subscribe to Seaside Quilting Supplies, and next to the subscribe button there's a little bell, and if you click on that bell you can change your notifications to all, so that each time that a tutorial comes up that's new, you'll get a notification so that you can go and watch the new tutorial that's coming out. And we have many that are coming out throughout all of this year, so many that it's hard to list. Each month we set aside what we're going to be doing, ones that we feel that will be helpful in between. I'm trying to do more individual ones like the bias binding, so that when we're doing projects, when we get to the end and you need to do binding, it will be easy to go back to those tutorials and see how to redo that, because it makes it easier for you to be able to reverse it, fast forward it. There might be parts of a tutorial that you don't even need and you can just fast forward. There might be parts that you need to review over and over. And when I was first learning how to do binding, I had to play a tutorial while I was practicing, and I had to keep reversing and going forward and reversing and going forward so that I could figure out the steps and see how they worked. And quite often we have to do that in order to learn, and then once you learn, you don't need it anymore, or if you haven't done it for a while, you can go back and review it. So anyways, I wish you happy sewing, and you take care.